The snow started falling early that morning, soft at first, then heavier as the hours passed. By mid-morning, the small town was covered in a thick white blanket. The streets were quiet, muffled under the weight of the snow, and the wind whispered coldly through the bare trees. The old lady, living alone in her small wooden house at the edge of town, watched the snow fall from her kitchen window. She sipped her tea, feeling the chill in her bones but also a strange sense of calm. She had lived through many winters, and the quiet of the snowfall always brought a certain peace. Her house was small but warm, filled with the scent of cinnamon and baked bread. She had a habit of keeping her home cozy, lighting the fireplace even when the cold was mild. Today the fire roared a little louder, casting shadows on the walls and making the room glow with a soft orange light. She hummed a tune as she placed a pot of soup on the stove, her movements slow but steady. There was a rhythm to her life that came from years of doing things the same way, day after day. She was content, yet her eyes often lingered on the window, watching the storm grow stronger. Far away from her quiet home, a group of bikers was struggling to keep moving. 15 men, members of a notorious Hells Angels chapter, were caught in the snowstorm while riding their motorcycles. Their bikes were heavy and difficult to control on the slippery roads, and the wind cut through their jackets like knives. Normally, they would never consider stopping at a small house in a quiet town, but the storm left them no choice. They were tired, hungry, and freezing, their hands numb from the cold. The group found themselves on a narrow road that led to the outskirts of the town. Snow was piling up quickly, making it almost impossible to ride any further. One of the bikers called out to the others, and they all slowed down, their engines sputtering and coughing in protest. They looked around, trying to find any sign of shelter. That's when one of them noticed smoke rising from a chimney in the distance. It was a thin wisp at first, but it promised warmth, food, and safety. Without speaking, they turned their bikes toward it, hope lighting up their cold faces. The old lady was busy in her kitchen when she heard the sound of engines struggling through the snow. At first, she thought it might be some neighbors trying to get through the storm, but the sound was louder, rougher, and had a sense of urgency. She wiped her hands on her apron and went to the window. Peering through the falling snow, she saw them. 15 men on motorcycles, their leather jackets covered in snow, faces tense and exhausted. Her heart went out to them immediately. She didn't know who they were, and she didn't care about their reputation. She only saw people in need. She quickly set to work, preparing what she could. She added more firewood to the fireplace, set another pot of soup on the stove, and grabbed blankets from her closet. She didn't think about whether it was safe or not. She just knew she could help. By the time the bikers arrived at her gate, their engines barely able to push through the snow, she was ready. The first few bikers approached cautiously, their eyes scanning the small house. They had expected empty windows and a lonely yard, not the sight of an old woman opening her door with a warm smile and a steaming bowl of soup in her hands. She didn't ask their names or where they came from. She simply said, "Come in before you freeze. You must be tired." There was a pause, a moment of hesitation. They were not used to kindness without suspicion. Their lives were full of harsh words and mistrust. Yet something in her tone, soft and genuine, made them step forward. One by one, they handed their gloves and scarves to her and entered the warm house. The smell of soup and burning wood filled their senses, making them forget the cold and the storm outside. The old lady guided them to the living room, spreading out blankets on the floor and chairs. She had enough chairs for some, but the rest would have to sit on the carpet near the fire. She didn't mind. They didn't mind. The warmth of the room and the fire seemed to melt away the distance between them, the boundaries of reputation and past judgments fading in the face of simple human need. While the bikers warmed themselves, she served the soup. It wasn't fancy, just simple vegetables and broth, but it was hot and nourishing. She placed bowls in front of them and watched as they hesitated for a moment before digging in. The silence was comfortable, filled with the sound of spoons clinking against bowls and the occasional cough or grunt of relief. For the first time that day, they felt safe. Some of the bikers started talking quietly among themselves, surprised at the hospitality of the old lady. She listened with a gentle smile, occasionally asking questions or offering more food. They spoke about the storm, the road, and how unusual it was to find someone willing to help without a second thought. The old lady didn't need to hear their stories to know they were good people, capable of kindness themselves. She only needed to see the hunger in their eyes and the cold in their bones. After the soup, she offered blankets and extra jackets she had kept for guests in winter. She showed them where they could sleep on the floor near the fire, on chairs, or even on her old couch. They didn't argue or resist. They simply accepted her generosity. There was a sense of relief in the room, a feeling of unexpected comfort and warmth. The old lady sat down in her rocking chair, her hands folded in her lap, watching them settle in. She thought about the years she had lived alone, the quiet days filled with routine and solitude. Today her home was alive with strangers, and yet it felt right. She didn't care about their rough exterior or their tattoos. She only saw human beings who needed warmth, safety, and a little kindness. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside, the room was bright and safe. The old lady hummed softly, moving occasionally to add more wood to the fire or bring extra blankets. The bikers, feeling the warmth, began to relax. One of them, a tall man with a scruffy beard, looked around and said softly, almost to himself, "I didn't think anyone would do this for us." The old lady smiled but didn't answer. Words were unnecessary. Her actions had said enough. As night fell, the snow piled higher outside. The wind howled, and the motorcycles sat buried partially in snow, but inside the fire crackled and the soup pot still held warmth. The bikers found places to rest, some near the fire, some on blankets spread across the floor. They were strangers, yet for this night, they were part of a little community built on trust, generosity, and humanity. The old lady checked on them one last time before heading to her small bedroom. She felt a quiet satisfaction, a sense of peace that comes from helping without expectation. She knew the world could be harsh, that people often judged before they saw the heart inside. But tonight she had made a difference. She had given shelter, warmth, and kindness to 15 men who had nowhere else to go. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the world in white silence. Inside, a small house glowed with firelight, laughter, and the soft hum of contentment. The storm would pass and the bikers would leave, but for now they were safe. They were human beings, and they had been treated like such. The old lady closed her eyes, knowing that sometimes a simple act of kindness could make even the coldest storm feel a little warmer. After the last of the bikers settled near the fire, the old lady moved around her small living room, making sure everyone had enough blankets and hot soup. Some of the men were quiet, still wary of the situation, but she treated them all with the same warmth and care, speaking softly and offering small gestures of kindness. She refilled bowls, adjusted cushions, and handed extra scarves to those who shivered. Her house had never been so lively, yet her calm demeanor seemed to put everyone at ease. The bikers began to notice the small details of her home. It was clean and simple, filled with things that spoke of a long life: handmade quilts, old photographs on the walls, books neatly arranged on shelves. Some of the men glanced at the pictures, wondering about the stories behind them. One of the younger bikers, hesitant at first, asked about a photograph of her standing beside a large garden. She smiled and said it was her favorite place in the world, where she grew vegetables and flowers. It wasn't a grand place, but it was full of love and care, just like her home. Slowly, conversation started to flow. One of the older bikers, who had a scar running along his cheek, began talking about how treacherous the snowstorm had been, and how lucky they were to find a house open in the middle of nowhere. Another mentioned the roads they had traveled, the slippery ice, and the near misses with other vehicles. They spoke quietly, not wanting to disturb the peaceful atmosphere, but their voices carried a mixture of relief and respect for the old lady, who had opened her home without hesitation. She listened to their stories with genuine interest. She asked questions, laughed at their jokes, and occasionally shook her head at their exaggerated tales. She did not judge them for their past or their lifestyle. To her, they were simply people in need of warmth, food, and shelter. And that was enough. Her sincerity began to dissolve the tension in the room, and the bikers, who were used to the world treating them with suspicion and hostility, felt a sense of acceptance they had not expected. One of the bikers, a man with a thick beard and piercing eyes, quietly observed the old lady as she moved around, attending to everyone. He had seen many people in his life, but few who treated strangers with such patience and care. He leaned back on the chair, his expression softening, and realized that kindness could come from unexpected places. He had come to expect harsh words and rejection, yet here he was, being treated like a guest in a warm home. The old lady noticed a few of them shivering despite the blankets. She went to the kitchen and returned with a tray of hot tea and cookies she had baked earlier in the day. The aroma filled the room and the bikers looked at her with surprise. They had expected only a roof and perhaps some food, but not this level of attention to detail. She handed each man a cup, ensuring they could hold it safely without burning their hands. As they sipped, some of them allowed themselves to relax, their eyes softening as the warmth spread through their bodies. While the storm raged outside, the old lady shared stories of her own life. She spoke about the winters she had endured, the challenges of living alone, and the simple joys of tending her garden and baking bread. Her voice was calm and steady, filled with wisdom and a quiet strength. The bikers listened, some nodding, others leaning forward, genuinely interested. It was the first time in a long time that many of them had felt they were in a place where they could listen and be listened to without judgment. One of the younger bikers, sitting near the fire, spoke up. He told a story about his first ride with the gang, the fear and excitement and the sense of belonging he had felt. He paused, glancing at the old lady, unsure if she would understand. She smiled gently and nodded, acknowledging his words without comment, giving him the courage to continue. He talked about the struggles he had faced, the mistakes he had made, and the hope he carried for a better path. The room was silent except for his voice and the crackle of the fire, yet there was an understanding growing among them. The old lady then asked them if they were comfortable and if they needed anything else. Some asked for more blankets, while others simply shook their heads, content for the moment. She moved from one to another, checking their hands for coldness, adjusting pillows, and making sure they all had something to eat. Her small gestures, unnoticed by some, were powerful acts of care. The bikers began to see her not just as a stranger, but as someone who genuinely cared about their well-being. As the night went on, the atmosphere in the room changed. The bikers, initially cautious, started to open up more. They shared small laughs over minor stories, commented on the snowstorm, and even asked about her daily routines. She responded with warmth, never imposing, always patient. Her kindness was steady, consistent, and unassuming, yet it left a deep impression. The bikers felt a sense of trust growing, an unusual feeling for people often treated with fear or suspicion. Some of the bikers helped in small ways, moving chairs closer to the fire, stacking extra blankets, or helping the old lady carry dishes back to the kitchen. It was not because they had to, but because they wanted to give back some of the care they were receiving. Small acts of generosity began to pass between them, creating a quiet bond within the room. The storm outside no longer seemed threatening. Inside, there was warmth, laughter, and a shared sense of humanity. As the hours passed, the bikers began to settle down for the night. The old lady showed them where they could rest, ensuring that everyone had enough space to sleep comfortably. Some chose to lie on the floor near the fire, others on chairs or the couch. She moved quietly around the room, making small adjustments to blankets and pillows, her eyes soft and caring. She knew that these men, despite their tough exterior, were vulnerable in this moment, and she treated that vulnerability with respect. Before she finally retired to her own small bedroom, the old lady took a moment to look around. The fire glowed softly. The storm continued outside, and the room was filled with the quiet sounds of contentment. She felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that she had provided not just shelter but comfort, understanding, and kindness. It was a small act, but in that moment it mattered immensely. The bikers, some lying on blankets, others leaning in chairs, felt a warmth that went beyond the fire. They realized that this simple house, this small act of generosity, had given them something rare: trust. They looked at the old lady with respect, silently acknowledging the gift she had given without expectation. For the first time that day, and perhaps in many days before, they felt seen and cared for in a way that transcended their rough appearances. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but inside the house there was peace. The old lady's quiet strength and steady kindness had transformed the room. The bikers would remember this night, not for the storm, not for the struggle on the roads, but for the warmth and humanity they had found in a small house on the edge of town. The storm would eventually pass, but the bond that began tonight would linger far longer, a reminder of the power of simple, genuine kindness. Morning arrived slowly, with the soft light of the sun filtering through the snow-covered windows. The storm had subsided overnight, leaving the world outside bright and quiet. glistening under a layer of fresh snow. Inside the old lady's house, the atmosphere was calm and warm. The bikers stirred slowly, stretching and yawning as the fire's heat wrapped around them. For many, it was the first night in a long time that they had felt truly safe and at ease. The old lady moved quietly around the room, making sure everyone was comfortable. She brought more blankets, poured fresh cups of tea, and set out simple breakfast items: bread, jam, and fruit. The smell of toasted bread mixed with the earthy scent of the fire, filling the room with a sense of comfort. The bikers, still drowsy, from sleep began to gather, sharing smiles and quiet conversations. The tension from the previous day seemed to have lifted, replaced with a quiet camaraderie. They ate slowly, appreciating both the warmth of the food and the warmth of the company. One of the bikers, a tall man with a gentle voice, commented on how different it felt to be treated with kindness instead of suspicion. Another, who had been quiet and reserved, nodded in agreement, admitting that they were not used to people trusting them so easily. The old lady simply smiled, saying nothing, letting her actions speak for her. After breakfast, the bikers began to move around the house. Some offered to help, stacking firewood, sweeping the floor, and even clearing snow from the porch. The old lady accepted their help with gratitude, yet she did not expect it. She allowed them to contribute because she believed that kindness was strengthened when shared. As they worked together, a sense of teamwork and mutual respect grew stronger, bridging the gap between strangers who had met under unusual circumstances. The younger bikers were fascinated by her stories. She spoke of winters past, her garden, and the small joys of living simply. They listened, genuinely curious, and occasionally asked questions. Each answer revealed a life filled with quiet strength and resilience. The bikers, who had been accustomed to a world that judged them harshly, felt a sense of admiration for her. Her age, experience, and unassuming wisdom were a reminder that courage and kindness often come in forms they had never expected. Some of the bikers, feeling comfortable, began sharing more personal stories. They spoke about their journeys, the challenges of their lifestyle, and the rare moments of joy they had found on the road. The old lady listened attentively, never interrupting, acknowledging their experiences with small nods and gentle words. The room, once filled with silence and caution, now resonated with understanding, connection, and empathy. By mid-morning, the storm outside had completely cleared, revealing a landscape sparkling in sunlight. The bikers decided to step outside to inspect their motorcycles and prepare for departure. The old lady watched them, her heart warm despite the cold air. She could see the snow clinging to their leather jackets, their boots crunching on the thick snow. One by one, they worked together to dig out their bikes, brush off the snow, and check for any damage caused by the storm. Even in these practical tasks, a sense of cooperation and shared purpose was evident. As they worked, some bikers paused to help the old lady clear the steps in the small pathway to the road. She was touched by their thoughtfulness, realizing that the kindness she had shown was being reciprocated in ways both practical and heartfelt. Her house, modest and small, had become a place of connection, a temporary haven where respect and humanity flourished. After the bikes were ready, they gathered near the porch, their breath visible in the cold morning air. They looked at the old lady with expressions that mixed gratitude, admiration, and respect. Words felt insufficient to express the depth of their appreciation, but their eyes and gestures spoke volumes. One of the bikers, who had been quiet for most of the morning, stepped forward and offered a small, respectful nod. The old lady returned the gesture with a smile, knowing that this simple acknowledgement held meaning beyond words. Before leaving, one of the older bikers spoke up, expressing how rare it was to find someone who treated them with pure kindness without expectation. He explained that in their world, trust and generosity were not given freely, and yet she had welcomed them without hesitation. Her actions had reminded them that humanity could exist in its simplest form, without judgment or fear. The words hung in the crisp air, a testament to the profound impact of her small, genuine act. The old lady waved as they mounted their motorcycles, her heart heavy with a mix of happiness and melancholy. She knew that they would leave, and life would return to its quiet rhythm. Yet, The bond formed in her home would linger in the hearts of all who had shared this moment. The bikers, often seen as rough and untouchable, had experienced a rare gift, being treated with trust, kindness, and respect. And the old lady had been the one to offer it, effortlessly and without thought of reward. As the engines roared to life, they paused for a moment, looking back at the small wooden house. The snow glistened in the sunlight, and the smoke from the chimney curled lazily into the sky. It was a simple home, humble and unassuming, yet it had become a sanctuary. The bikers nodded to one another, silently agreeing that this encounter would stay with them for years to come. They rode off, their tires crunching on the snow, leaving behind a quiet trail of gratitude. Back inside, the old lady returned to her kitchen. She washed the dishes left from breakfast, her movements slow but steady. She reflected on the night and morning, realizing that her small gestures of warmth and care had created an impact far beyond what she had imagined. She felt a quiet joy, a sense of purpose fulfilled, knowing that in offering comfort to strangers she had reminded them, and herself, of the power of kindness. The rest of the day passed quietly. She tended to her garden, prepared a simple lunch, and checked the fireplace, keeping the home warm and ready for any unforeseen visitors. The experience with the bikers lingered in her mind, not as a dramatic event, but as a reminder that humanity could shine even in the smallest actions. She hummed a tune as she worked, feeling a sense of connection to people she had only just met but already respected deeply. In the evening, she sat by the fire with a cup of tea, thinking about the world outside her home. The storm had brought unexpected visitors, and in doing so, had transformed a simple winter day into something remarkable. She felt a quiet pride, not in the attention or recognition, but in the simple act of helping others. The biker's gratitude was not something she sought, yet it reminded her that even small gestures could leave lasting impressions. As night fell, she looked out at the snowy landscape, now calm and peaceful. The world was quiet again, but the memory of the bikers, their stories and their laughter filled her home. She knew that tomorrow would bring the ordinary routines of life, yet the extraordinary warmth of human connection would remain with her. For a night and a morning, strangers had become guests, and a small house on the edge of town had become a sanctuary for trust, kindness, and shared humanity. After the bikers rode off, the old lady thought her unusual encounter was over. She went about her day, tending to her small garden, mending clothes, and cleaning her cozy home. Life returned to its normal rhythm, yet her thoughts kept wandering back to the men who had stayed in her house. She wondered if they had reached their destination safely, if they had found warmth elsewhere, and if they remembered the small acts of kindness she had offered. The thought made her smile quietly to herself. Later that afternoon, as she sipped tea by the window, she noticed movement outside. At first, she thought it might be neighbors or delivery trucks making their rounds, but soon realized it was something unusual. One by one, motorcycles appeared on the road leading to her house. The sight was surprising. More and more bikes kept arriving, filling the road. Her heart began to race, uncertain what to expect. She stepped outside into the cold, the snow crunching beneath her feet, and watched as nearly 100 motorcycles lined up in front of her home. The riders dismounted, forming small groups as they approached. The old lady's eyes widened, recognizing the familiar leather jackets and insignias of the Hells Angels. She had only sheltered 15 men the night before, yet now an entire chapter, or perhaps multiple chapters, stood at her doorstep. The realization struck her that word of her kindness had spread quickly, carried by the bikers she had helped. Each man approached with a nod, a smile, or a quiet greeting, showing respect and gratitude for what she had done. She welcomed them warmly, offering blankets, hot drinks, and simple gestures of hospitality. There was no fear or tension, only a sense of admiration and appreciation from the bikers. Many of them had never encountered someone who treated them without judgment, and it left a profound impression. The old lady did not know what to say to such a crowd. She simply offered what she had and continued her quiet acts of care, letting her actions speak louder than words. The bikers began moving around the property, helping in ways they could. Some shoveled snow from the driveway and paths, while others carried firewood to the house, stacking it neatly near the entrance. A few of them checked the motorcycles, making sure each one was ready for safe travel once they left. The old lady watched them with a mixture of awe and gratitude. The simple acts of mutual respect and cooperation created a sense of community she had never anticipated in her small, quiet life. Conversations started to flow naturally. One biker spoke about how far they had come to find her house, following the story of the kindness they had heard about the day before. Another described the respect that had grown among the bikers for someone who had shown genuine care without expecting anything in return. The words were heartfelt, a testament to the impact of the old lady's simple actions. They shared laughter and stories, forming bonds that transcended the stereotypes often associated with their group. The old lady served hot soup and tea to the crowd, moving carefully from person to person. She ensured everyone had something to eat, even as the number of bikers far exceeded the 15 she had first sheltered. They were respectful and grateful, never demanding or overstepping. Her quiet generosity inspired a sense of humility among them, reminding the men that acts of kindness could ripple far beyond the immediate moment. Some bikers offered small gifts in return, bags of food, warm blankets, and even small handmade items. They insisted she take them, though she tried to refuse at first. Seeing the sincerity in their eyes, she accepted a few, realizing that this was their way of expressing gratitude and forming a connection. The exchange was not about value, but about mutual respect and acknowledgement. In that moment, the old lady felt a deep sense of fulfillment, understanding that simple human gestures could carry immense meaning. The sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the snow-covered landscape. The bikers knew they could not stay indefinitely, yet there was a reluctance to leave. They had come seeking to thank her, but what they found was far more meaningful, a place where they were treated as human beings, not judged by appearances or affiliations. The old lady stood by the porch, smiling at each rider as they prepared to depart, knowing that the memory of this day would linger for both her and the bikers. Before leaving, one of the bikers stepped forward and spoke on behalf of the group. He expressed their collective gratitude, explaining how rare it was to encounter someone who showed pure kindness without expecting anything in return. The old lady simply nodded, feeling warmth in her heart. She knew she had done what any person might do when faced with someone in need. Yet the ripple effect of that action was far greater than she could have imagined. As the motorcycles roared back to life and the riders departed one by one, the old lady watched them disappear down the road. The snow sparkled under the fading sunlight, and the quiet of the evening returned. Her yard, once empty and peaceful, now carried the traces of laughter, conversation, and shared moments of humanity. She felt a sense of profound connection to the world, reminded that even the smallest acts of kindness could create lasting bonds. That evening, the old lady reflected on the events of the past 2 days. She realized that her simple decision to open her home had touched more lives than she could have imagined. The bikers had returned not only to thank her, but to honor the principle of kindness she embodied. She understood that trust and generosity could break down walls, change perceptions, and unite people from different walks of life. The thought filled her with quiet satisfaction and hope for the future. She returned to her routines, preparing dinner and tending to her home, but the memory of the bikers lingered. She felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that her actions had a lasting impact. The snowstorm that had initially brought strangers to her door had transformed into an unexpected celebration of humanity, proving that simple gestures could ripple far beyond a single moment. In the quiet of her home, she smiled, appreciating the profound lesson that kindness, when given freely, could connect hearts and leave a legacy that extended far beyond herself. The next morning, the old lady woke up to a quiet house. The previous days had been filled with the presence of strangers, warmth, and laughter. She looked out the window, expecting the usual calm and stillness that had once defined her life. But as she glanced at the snowy road leading to her house, she noticed movement. Motorcycles were approaching one by one, filling the lane until she could see a long line stretching down the road. Her heart skipped a beat as she realized that the bikers had returned, far more than she had ever imagined. Nearly 100 motorcycles were coming, their riders wearing leather jackets and insignia she had come to recognize. The old lady quickly moved around her home, preparing what she could. She lit the fireplace, brewed hot tea, and gathered blankets, although she knew it would not be enough for the number of people arriving. There was no fear in her heart, only a determination to welcome them as she had welcomed the first 15. She opened the door as the first riders reached her porch, her smile calm and welcoming despite the overwhelming sight before her. The bikers stepped off their motorcycles, forming small groups as they approached the house. They greeted her with nods, respectful gestures, and quiet words of gratitude. One by one, they told her how they had heard about the shelter she had provided during the storm, how her kindness had spread among the chapters, and how they wanted to show their appreciation. The old lady listened with quiet amazement, realizing that her simple act of generosity had created a ripple effect far beyond her small home. She welcomed each visitor warmly, offering tea, blankets, and small gestures of care. The bikers accepted gratefully, understanding that this was not about material things but about the respect and acknowledgement she was offering. Many of them had never experienced such treatment, and it touched them deeply. Their previous experiences had been filled with suspicion, judgment, and harsh words. But here, in this small house surrounded by snow, they found something rare, genuine humanity. As the bikers settled around the porch and yard, a sense of community began to form. Some helped carry firewood, while others cleared snow from the driveway. A few checked each motorcycle to ensure that no damage had occurred overnight. Their efforts were quiet, respectful, and cooperative, reflecting the appreciation they felt for the old lady. It was a scene of harmony and mutual respect, an unusual sight for anyone familiar with the rough reputation of the group. The old lady served hot soup and simple meals to those who gathered. She moved from person to person, making sure everyone had something to eat and drink. There was a rhythm to her movements, a careful attention to detail that showed her genuine care. The bikers in turn respected her space, accepting the warmth and sustenance she offered without demanding anything. It was a delicate balance of gratitude and humility, of kindness given and received. As the day progressed, conversations began to flow. The bikers shared stories of their travels, their lives, and the challenges they faced. They spoke of the storm that had brought them together, and of the unusual experience of finding someone who treated them with trust and respect. The old lady listened patiently, offering small responses and gentle encouragement. The dialogue was sincere, filled with admiration and understanding, creating bonds that went beyond the simple act of sheltering strangers. Some bikers offered small gifts in return. Handmade blankets, food items, and other thoughtful gestures were presented with sincerity. The old lady accepted a few, understanding that these were tokens of appreciation, not material demands. The exchange strengthened the connection, showing that generosity can inspire further acts of kindness, creating a cycle of respect and humanity that extended beyond the initial encounter. The sun began to set, casting long shadows over the snow-covered landscape. The bikers knew it was time to leave, yet there was a reluctance in the air. They had come to honor the old lady, but in doing so, they had formed a bond that neither distance nor time could erase. One by one, they mounted their motorcycles, exchanging quiet nods and smiles, their gestures full of respect and gratitude. The old lady stood on the porch waving as they departed, feeling a mixture of pride and humble satisfaction. After the last motorcycle roared down the road, the old lady returned inside. The house, once filled with voices and laughter, was quiet again. She moved through the rooms, straightening blankets, washing dishes, and reflecting on the events of the past few days. Her life, once solitary and routine, had been touched by the presence of strangers who had come to rely on her kindness. The realization filled her with quiet joy, knowing that a simple act could create such a profound impact. In the following days, the old lady continued her usual routines, yet the memory of the bikers lingered. She received letters and small packages from some of them, expressions of ongoing gratitude. She thought about how her small home had become a symbol of trust, respect, and human connection. The bikers had returned not just to thank her, but to honor the principle she represented, the belief that kindness should be given freely, without judgment or expectation. The experience changed more than just the bikers. It reminded the old lady of the importance of extending care and trust to others. She realized that even the simplest gestures, like offering warmth in a meal, could create ripples far beyond her own life. The story of her sheltering the bikers during the storm became a testament to the power of humanity, showing that generosity and compassion could break down walls and unite people from different walks of life. Months later, She would recall the line of motorcycles stretching down the snowy road, the respectful nods, the quiet words of thanks, and the shared moments of laughter. She would remember the warmth of the fire, the smell of hot soup, and the feeling of connection that had filled her home. It was a memory that would remain vivid, a reminder that acts of kindness, no matter how small, could leave lasting impressions and inspire others to follow the same path. The old lady continued to live her quiet life, tending her garden, baking bread, and keeping her home cozy. Yet she knew that the events of those days had changed her world, and the world of the bikers in ways that would never be forgotten. She had offered shelter to strangers caught in a storm, and in doing so, she had created a lasting bond of respect, trust, and humanity. Her simple act of kindness had grown into something much larger, touching lives far beyond her own. And in her heart, she carried the quiet satisfaction of knowing that even small gestures could make a remarkable difference in the world.